the dawn of time, Blackmagic was released into the world, contained only by Blackmax's design. They fought to wrest control of the planet from our I-Reds that stood against them. To begin their mission, they had to determine which among them was the truest master of the Blackmagic. Pocket 4K versus Pocket 6K Pro. Begin.
Show yourself, old man! No chance of this powered 6K!
A superior man is modest in his speech, but exceeds in his actions. You would be wise to heed your words, as your youth betrays you.
Enough of your sayings and muses. I'm about to take hold of that old blue beard and take you...
Blue beard? My beard is white, you fool. With all the power of the 6K, you still cannot see true color.
Hey man, come on! I haven't updated yet, okay? It's kind of a sore subject.
The blue tint. You know, we never had that problem back in my day. In fact, we didn't need all those fancy gizmos and gadgets that you have. We traveled the road with companions
Yeah, spare me the old glory days, could you? You know I'm stronger than you, and the only one capable of taking on the airy Reds. So move aside and let the youth handle this.
You will try.
Enough talk.
So welcome to an unusual versus series with anime cameras, or cartoon cameras, whatever you'd like to call them. But there will be a series of these and more videos to come with your favorite Blackmagic anime cameras. But anyways, this is also a series video that is trying to deep dive into each of these cameras that Blackmagic has and see which among them holds the true power of Blackmagic. So let's get into it. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell below and join us on Discord. I love building this community around Blackmagic cameras, storytelling, and just all things video related. It's been great getting to meet a bunch of people, other videographers, other storytellers, other adventurers. Make sure you're part of that too. We'd love to have you here. But enough of that, let's get back to the video. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the sensors for the camera. The 6K Pro has a super 35mm sensor, or 23.10mm by 12.99mm, was originally known as Super Scope 235, which is basically a motion picture film format that uses exactly the same film stock as a standard 35mm film, but puts a larger image frame on that stock by using the space normally reserved for the optical analog soundtrack. And Super 35mm and large format are really the standard for sensor sizes in cinematography today. Let's look at between the two, the Super 35mm sensor versus full frame and understanding depth of field. The Super 35mm sensor has a 1.5 crop factor compared to a full frame camera. And this is different versus the Pocket 4K system, which is a micro 4/3 system, which gives you about a crop factor of ×2. So does this mean if you film with a 35mm, it doesn't turn actually 52mm lens? In a sense, yes and no. The lens is still functioning as a 35mm lens, but the sensor is capturing a smaller part of what the lens is actually seeing. You're not actually changing the focal length of the lens itself. So if you were to film this with a full frame sensor, you would have a much wider view of it because it's able to capture more of what the lens is seeing. So not only does this affect the focal length of the lens, but it also will affect the aperture too, meaning if you're filming it with a 35mm lens at an f-stop of 4.0, you're actually filming at about an f-stop of 6. Now, there is this myth out there that the size of a sensor affects your depth of field, and that's something that we'll have to bring up in a future video. But besides the crop factor and size, what's really the difference maker between the MFT system and a super 35mm system that the 6K Pro has? And does it really make that much of a difference? Generally, MFT systems like the Pocket 4K has, in low light, perform pretty bad in conditions where you have to really crank up the ISO. But with Blackmagic's design, with all the Pocket series to have the dual ISO systems inside, it eliminates to a point some of the issues associated with higher ISO, allowing you to have native ISO at 400 and a native ISO also at 3200, which allows you to have a cleaner image in harder to light situations. The Pocket 6K Pro has the same system installed and theoretically performs better in low light than the Pocket 4K does, and this is obviously due to the larger sensor size and the ability to record in 6K, allowing you to downscale to 4K, helping to ease some of the noise in the image if necessary, while also not having that doubled aperture like the 4K does. Now, telecentric optical path is something interesting that the MFT sensor has. When the light is coming into the sensor, it's actually hitting parallel. Essentially, the diameter of the lens on the MFT system, or the mount, exceeds the size of the sensor, meaning that you'll have sharper footage in the corners of your image, which is helpful when it comes to using wide-angle lenses. This is really an area the Pocket 4K outperforms the 6K Pro in. Though if you wanted to, you could always crop in the image because of the 6K footage to eliminate anything on the edge of the footage itself. At the end of the day, whether you use an MFT or super 35mm system, I would say they're both pretty capable at capturing good footage. So I really wouldn't let the quality of footage on either sensor system keep you from using them. Now, granted, the super 35mm was more of industry standard, so there's something to think about as far as that. Now, the better question appears to be on the future viability of the two systems. While the Super 35mm is an industry standard at this point, the MFT system has always had an ominous future surrounding it, with many in the camera industry predicting maybe its eventual death. And while I really think that's hyper speculation by those who just don't like MFT systems, it's worth looking into when considering whether or not to heavily invest in a system with a cloudy future. But that's part of the interesting thing with this, with the MFT sensors and the system, is that MFT does seem to be, they are still releasing new cameras with MFT mounts and MFT sensors inside of them. So at the end of the day, it looks like they're going to be around for enough time. But in respect to the sensor systems on the camera, the Pocket 6K Pro just, I would say, edges out the Pocket 4K in this category due to just obviously its superior resolution and more secured future. Lenses. A quick overview of the lenses both have. The Pocket 4K and Pocket 6K Pro both use two different lens mounting options, as talked about previously. EF for the 6K Pro and MFT for the Pocket 4K, though the Pocket 4K can use adapters to use EF lenses. So we are going to quickly break down the lenses for both of these cameras and talk about the pros and cons of each. So let's get started. The first thing to consider when looking at both system lenses is to look at the variety of lenses available, as well as future forecasts of what will be available. Both MFT and EF systems have a deep selection of lenses to choose from. For EF though, you cannot use an MFT lens on an EF mount, and that's really what makes an MFT system intriguing. It's adaptable to almost any mount system through various adapters. So while that can be more expensive, you do have more flexibility with the lenses you can choose from. Not to say that you can't adapt from an EF mount, you just kind of have a lot less options for EF mount systems, as they're primarily used by Canon, and that makes most of the lens options for EF Canon made. Though you have other companies that make lenses for EF mounts, but Canon is by far the largest manufacturer of them. And the main issue is to look for in the future is that Canon is starting to retire a lot of their EF lenses and their EF mount systems that they're kind of going away from in their mirrorless designs that they previously would use on their DSLR cameras, and now are using an RF mount system developed by Canon in 2018. In April of 2021, Canon officially announced the retirement of a lot of EF lenses, and I've linked to this below. I would expect that the EF system honestly still has a long time left on it, and it has the potential to be revitalized down the line potentially. And with new lens systems coming out, it still has some good years left on it. And with the new lens system coming out, it does open the door for better deals on quality lenses. It's something to think about with EF lenses that shortly here in the future, you might be able to get really good glass for much cheaper than it was worth like a year ago. So it's something to think about with those EF lenses. Now, as far as the MFT lenses, Lumix is a well-known manufacturer of these lenses, but they are far from the only one to manufacture these style lenses. And from what I've seen over the past few years of owning a Pocket 4K, it seems like there's just always a steady stream of new Micro Four Thirds lenses being developed and released. And there are still many cameras and lenses being developed in 2021 that utilize Micro Four Thirds systems. So while this system does have the potential, as said by many, to eventually kind of fade off and die, I think it might have slightly longer legs than the EF system, while at the same time offering you more flexibility to adapt to different lens mounts than the EF system does. So it's something to think about. And lastly, pricing. The MFT lenses generally are cheaper than their EF counterparts in most cases. Now, there are some cases where MFT cinema lenses can be slightly more expensive as a Micro Four Thirds system. I haven't seen a ton of that, but I've had some cases where it was cheaper to purchase an EF Cine lens and then convert it to a Micro Four Thirds system. In the category of lenses, honestly, I would say the MFT system takes just a slight edge, mostly because it's able to adapt. Not only can you use MFT lenses, you can also use EF lenses. So any of the factors that EF lenses would have with them would also apply to MFT in a way. So MFT still wins in that category as far as I would be concerned, especially when starting out. Let's talk about accessories and cage systems. It was interesting to me that Blackmagic did not coordinate with some other companies when it came to rig designs before they released the Pocket 6K Pro. It honestly felt forever before we got a viable cage option for this brand new camera in the Tilta and small rig builds. So while I understand keeping it under wraps, it was difficult to use at first and still is in some ways because there are very few accessories in the market right now for the Pocket 6K Pro. And that probably won't be the case as we cross over into 2022, but for right now, the Pocket 4K, because it's been around longer, honestly has a lot more accessories and third-party products for it than the 6K Pro does, but I see that changing over time in the near future. Inputs and hardware. So first up in inputs and outputs is the audio interface in the Pocket 4K and 6K Pro. The Pocket 4K comes with a mini XLR connection and an unbalanced 3.5mm input, and the Pocket 6K Pro comes with two mini XLR inputs and a 3.5mm input as well, giving the Pocket 6K Pro the edge, I honestly think, when it comes to the audio inputs. And I've used both cameras with varying microphones and have not really noticed much of a difference in the preamps of these cameras. So from what I can tell, they seem to be either same or fairly similar in nature of quality. So not much difference, honestly, or difference in control in the user interface of the camera, which is not to say it's bad, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's meant for high-end production work, but it's good enough for documentary style work, honestly, in my opinion, or videos like this. For audio, I would say the Pocket 6K Pro beats the Pocket 4K primarily because of the extra mini XLR inputs. Internal ND, honestly, this one's pretty easy to grade on. The Pocket 6K Pro has internal ND filters of 2, 4, and 6 stops, and the Pocket 4K does not. So easy win, the Pocket 6K Pro. And again, as far as EVFs go, the Pocket 6K Pro is the only camera to have that feature available between the two. So I'm gonna give the victory to 6K Pro here. Batteries, pretty simple again. The Pocket 4K has the old LPE6 batteries, whereas the Pocket 6K Pro uses the larger NP-F570 batteries. That would say have about maybe 10 to 15 more minutes of life to them than the LPE6 on the Pocket 4K in my experience. The only way I would say that the Pocket 4K would edge the 6K Pro in this is that it does tend to draw, probably because of the size of it, less power than the 6K Pro, so it can be a lot less taxing on the V-mount batteries in particular. Barely, so it's not really enough in my opinion to give this the win over the Pocket 6K Pro. So the Pocket 6K Pro. In weight, the Pocket 6K Pro comes in at a body camera weight of 2.73 pounds versus the Pocket 4K's weight of 1.5 pounds. So, I mean, the Pocket 4K honestly beats the 6K Pro as far as weight goes, if that's a make or break deal for you. In the category, though, of inputs and hardware, the 6K Pro, I mean, it's a new camera and it has new features to it. It honestly easily beats the older Pocket 4K. Not much surprise there. There is as this chart shows, there's a much bigger difference bitrate wise between 6K footage and 4K footage. And while you can bring that down to 4K in the Pocket 6K Pro, you do have the crop factor to worry about with that. So if you plan on using 6K, just understand that you will probably have much more storage. Your file sizes will be much larger than they will be with the Pocket 4K. Now, rolling shutter is something interesting for the two of them. And a quick refresher on what the rolling shutter is. So when the camera sensor is taking an image of a video, it goes from side to side. It essentially scans the sensor side to side. So, and how long it takes to scan between side to side determines a couple of things. If it's slow enough and you're moving the camera on, you can get a lot of warbling on your image. And if it's fast enough, you won't notice as much as you're moving, but it is something to think about if it's too slow. With a Pocket 4K, at its 4K resolution option, it has about a 16.2 millisecond rolling shutter for the Pocket for 4K and 7.8 milliseconds for the HD crop. The Pocket 6K Pro comes in around about like 16.7 milliseconds for 4K resolution, but at its 6K resolution, it comes in at 20 milliseconds. So when it comes down to it, the 4K definitely has better rolling shutter compared to the 6K Pro. So that's something that you need to watch out for. Footage quality. This is something that's incredibly hard to judge on, I would say. As a lot of times when you get newer cameras, as things move farther digitally along, while the image looks good still, it might not look the quality or vintage look that previous models have had before it. And in some of this case, I wouldn't go as far as to say the Pocket 4K has a vintage image. You know, you can get vintage images out of it depending on what lenses you use and how you set it up. But I find a lot of times that I prefer the Pocket 4K's image over the Pocket 6K Pro. Not to just like pile on, say how I'm saying how the Pocket 6K Pro's quality of footage is awful. I don't know if it's the MFT sensor that does it for me, that I just kind of like how it looks a little bit better. I don't know. It honestly, it's so subjective to what you as a creator like to see, which we stare at screens literally all day. It can be hard to sometimes see things differently, and especially when there's new cameras coming in. Like, I could look at someone who posts something with like a Sony camera and go like, oh my gosh, their footage looks so good, because, you know, it looks completely different with how their color science is and how they shoot things than I do with my Blackmagic cameras. Does that make either wrong? No, it just, sometimes as creators, we kind of just stare at the same image for so long, it kind of never looks new or different. And because of that, when we look at something different than what we make or what's typical with what the cameras we use, we start getting like, oh my gosh, it looks so good. But then you go do the same thing with that. You could purchase that camera and then you use it and you're like, oh, I'm just seeing the same thing over and over again. You look at another camera and it's always the grass is greener on the other side, right? So for this image quality, I don't really have an issue with either of them. For me personally, I like the Pocket 4K. Pocket 4K's image quality much better than the 6K Pro. Much better is a strong amount, I would say. I would say it edges out for me, the 6K Pro footage. Nothing wrong with 6K Pro footage, and maybe it's the fact that it's just newer and hasn't been tested and is used as much as the Pocket 4K, but I'll give the slight edge to the Pocket 4K in this. But when it comes down to it, after we've talked extensively about the two cameras, and I've talked so much about these two cameras on this channel already, there's plenty to go back and look at. I don't really need to go into some of the finer details of dual native ISO or bitrate options, as they both have similar features as that. And I'm really just looking at the technical details and kind of experience with the two of them to kind of grade this. So before we get into this final grade, this final segment, tell us in the comments below which camera you put on your top list. Would you give the victory to the Pocket 6K Pro, or would you give the victory to the Pocket 4K? And now that you commented, let's get on to the final grade.
It's time to surrender, old man. I am the true master of the Blackmagic. You stand no chance against me.
You fool, you fool. Oh, how I fear for the youth of this land. In your arrogance, you still fail to realize that I possess knowledge of magic and power you can only dream of. If you're so certain that you'll possess the power necessary, so be it. And you know